Water contamination levels are broken into three parts: categories. There are also other issues like regulated and hazardous materials and mold that are not included in these categories. They've been called special situations in past standards, but follow along in your manual as we look at these categories. I really don't want to do this again, but here to pontificate unnecessarily on the definitions of the three categories of water, you guessed it, the ninja of nasty, Nerdy Nick.
Ninja. Well, let me tell you, if the Velcro strap Nike shoe fits, and it does, let me rain this beautiful knowledge down on you folks. In Category 1, Category 1 losses. This is a water that originates from a sanitary water source and does not pose substantial risk from dermal, ingestion, or inhalation exposure. Some examples of Category 1 water can include, not limited to, broken water supply lines, tub, sink overflows with no contaminants, appliance malfunctions involving water supply lines, melting ice or melting snow, falling rainwater, broken toilet tanks, toilet bowls that do not contain contaminants or additives. Now, Category 1 water can deteriorate to Category 2 or Category 3. Category 1 water that flows into an uncontaminated building does not constitute an immediate change in the category. Remember that. However, Category 1 water that flows into contaminated building substances can constitute an immediate change in the category. Now, once microorganisms become wet from the water intrusion, depending upon the length of time that they remain wet and the temperature, well, then they can begin to grow in numbers, can change the category of the water. Odors can indicate that Category 1 water has deteriorated. Now, Category 2. Category 2 water contains significant contamination, has the potential to cause discomfort or sickness if contacted or consumed by humans. It's disgusting. Category 2 water can contain potentially unsafe levels of microorganisms or nutrients for microorganisms, as well as other organic or inorganic material, chemical or biological. Here's some examples of Category 2 water. They can include, not limited to, discharge from dishwashers or washing machines, overflows from washing machines, overflows from toilet bowls, on the room side of the trap, remember that, with some urine, no feces, seepage due to hydrostatic pressure, broken aquariums, punctured water beds. What is this, the 80s? Category 2 water can deteriorate to Category 3. Now, once microorganisms become wet from the water intrusion, depending upon the length of time that they remain wet and the temperature, once again, they can begin to grow in numbers. And they'll change the category of the water. That's a lot of reading. Category 3. Category 3 water. Category 3 water is grossly contaminated, disgusting stuff. Contain pathogenic, toxigenic, other harmful agents. Can cause significant adverse reactions to humans if contacted or consumed. Stay away from it. Don't drink it. Examples of Category 3 water can include, not limited to, sewage. Yuck. Waistline backflows that originate from beyond the trap. It's regardless of visible content or color. All forms of flooding from seawater, rising water from rivers or streams, other contaminated water entering or affecting the indoor environment, like wind-driven rain from hurricanes, tropical storms, or other water-related events. Category 3 water can carry trace levels of regulated or hazardous materials like pesticides, toxic organic substances. Again, I feel like I need to break this down for you. You don't look like you understand. Category 1, Cat 1, for the layperson like you. It's clean water from a clean source, clean enough that it would not likely make you sick. However, it does not have to be clean enough to drink. It's disgusting. Who drinks off the floor anyway? I don't know who's saying this. Category 1 water, James, had to be clean enough to drink off the floor. You need to stop. Stop saying it. Who's saying it? Is it you? Are you saying it? Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I get frustrated, but you just don't get it. Okay. Category 1 water is not contaminated to the point of likely harming you. Okay? Moving on. Category 2 water contains significant contamination and can hurt you. Obviously, we need to clean this, right? Again, I hear people saying that there's no such thing as Cat 1 water. Who are these people? Stop listening to them. You have to remediate Cat 2 and Cat 3 back to Cat 1 before drying. So there has to be a Cat 1 water. Cat 3 is grossly contaminated. Grossly contaminated because it's disgusting. Again, it's also dangerous. It can make you very sick and also the employees very sick. So we have to thoroughly decontaminate it back to Cat 1 while protecting ourselves. See, a contaminated water source like sewage is not going to get less contaminated after it leaves the source, but a clean source can get more contaminated over time by temperature or flowing through contaminants. Okay, so those are the 3 categories of water contamination, right? But remember, there's also regulated, hazardous material, and mold in addition to the categories. It is because these regulated, hazardous materials or mold require a different approach. You have to be licensed or qualified to remove materials such as asbestos or lead. Now, mold remediation is also different than decontaminating Cat 3 contamination. I know, it's a lot of information for someone like you. But you can read all the definitions again in your student manual, and by looking at your face, I would suggest you do so.
I feel like there was lead in your childhood home. Maybe even the windowsills were a little chewed up. Did you notice that by chance? What category was that, Nerdy Nick?
Let me tell you something, Jeremy. Pay close attention. This is something that you should know. And the presence of lead does not change categories, okay? And yes, there was lead paint in our home. And there were tooth marks in the windowsills. But it wasn't me, okay? Why would you even ask me that? Is it because our home in Buffalo was built before 1978? In 1978, there was a ban on consumer use of lead-containing paint products. Is that why you asked? Or are you asking me because the United States EPA's lead renovation, repair, and painting rule, which requires that firms performing renovation, repair, and painting projects that disturb lead-based paint in homes, child care facilities, and preschools built before 1978 have their firms certified by EPA or an EPA-authorized state. Use certified renovators who are trained by EPA-approved training providers and follow lead-safe work practices?
Thank you for sharing all that good information on lead. We appreciate it. Did you guys catch that? Did you catch that information he shared on lead?
So let me get this straight. Homes built in the U.S. prior to 1978 may have lead, so we need to take appropriate action on those. Now, do we need any kind of certification to do work on homes where we would be messing with the lead paint?
Yes, all U.S. firms are required to have RRP certification if they disturb lead paint, and they must use lead-safe practices. So all U.S. restoration firms need to have that EPA RRP certification and training and follow those guidelines. Of course, that's all subject to change too. But whether you're inside or outside of the United States, you're responsible to understand and comply with all the rules that govern regulated materials. Now let's go back to the discussion of categories, which is water-based contamination. We only dry Category 1 water. That means if you determined a building was affected by Category 2 or Category 3 water, you first need to decontaminate back to Category 1. You must also wear the appropriate PPE to the contamination so that you're protected appropriately, and then install engineering controls such as containment, negative pressure, and air filtration devices, which we might also call AFDs. And while we're doing that, follow safe work practices.
Well, that brings up a point. One of the things we have always wondered about is if we need to call somebody to sample our Cat 3 jobs.
That's a great question. The person that you're asking about is called an indoor environmental professional, or an IEP. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to. For Category 2 or Category 3 water intrusions where there are high-risk individuals or situations, the S500 says that either the restorer or materially interested parties should, and should is a standard of care word, should consider retaining an IEP to assess levels of contamination. So, can you think of a high-risk individual or situation where this would apply?
I would say if there are infants or elderly people living in the home, that would apply.
Or if people are already sick.
We actually did a job at a daycare and brought in an IEP.
Yes, those are all good examples of when we should consider bringing in an IEP according to what the S500 says. When it comes to cleaning and drying processes, category matters. With Cat 1, we initially start with cleaning to remove dust and soiling that could become airborne during drying. And then if we feel that there could still be an issue where there's just too much airborne contamination blowing around, based on the health of the individuals in the home or the building, we can then install an appropriate number of air filtration devices to help improve air quality during drying.
So, do we need to ask people if they think that they'll have a problem?
The S500 standard correctly puts the responsibility of making this decision on the restorer. If the restorer determines that airborne contamination could be an issue for the occupants, then they have the responsibility to address that. So, to answer your question, yes, you need to ask the occupants if they would like you to address airborne contamination with air filtration units. Once that's been determined, then you can move on to drying the building. Now, Category 1 is different from Category 2 and Category 3. Remember, Category 2 and Category 3 are considered contaminated. So that means before you can begin drying, you have to clean or remediate. Category 2 and Category 3 water needs to be decontaminated to the point that the water loss can be considered affected by Category 1 water. Get rid of the contamination first. Then you dry. In addition to this, the containment that you put up for Category 2 and Category 3 should remain in place for the duration of the drying when you're dealing with these contaminated losses. Now, we're going to go through an overview later of the steps involved in decontamination. But to be sure that you've captured all of these definitions and understand how to use them correctly, pause this program, and I want you to work on the Categories and Conditions worksheet in your student manual. Use the S500 definitions to provide the best answer with just the information that you've been given. The answers are going to be provided when the program restarts. So go ahead and pause the program right now. Here are the answers to the worksheet. Do you need more practice? There's going to be a few more opportunities in the quiz. But let's move on now to antimicrobials and biocides.